Welcome to this edition of the B2B Engagement Podcast. I'm your host, Gavin Finn from Kaon Interactive. And today our topic is aligning leadership and go-to-market strategy, particularly in healthcare. We're very fortunate to have with us an industry thought leader and a pioneer in her field, Nancy Hiller, who is the President and General Manager of Americas at Accuray. Nancy, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure. Just by way of introduction, you've spent quite a bit of years at one of the largest healthcare diagnostic companies in the world, and now you are an executive leadership and you're the president of a division at Accuray. But you actually started your career in the informatics field, in information technology. I wonder if you could give us a little bit of a background as to how you got started and what your career trajectory was that led you into this very significant set of roles you're in now.
So actually, if you go back even further, I started in revenue cycle. So for all of the college juniors and seniors out there who are struggling with I'm about to graduate in a field that I'm not sure I really should have chosen, it's okay, it will work out just fine. I was going to graduate in exercise physiology. At the last minute, I decided I don't think this is what I want to do. I pivoted and ended up with business and organizational communications, and then ended up working for a medical billing office. Started out as a biller, worked for that company for about 10 years in different roles, revenue cycle management, practice management. And then it was through that role, we actually used a software that was a GE healthcare software at the time. And they pulled me on board as an account manager, and that's how I got into informatics. So I had used one of their softwares for revenue cycle. And then the next 8 years were a blur. I had the chance to work with revenue cycle, PACS, risk, data informatics. It was really fun. And also just every day you learn something new about how data can be used in the healthcare field, how it's used well, how it's not used well today. There's so much we could be doing and should be doing that we're still not. It was really fun. And then from there, I made the shift over to imaging as well.
That's tremendous. And actually, that's very interesting because your career has taken a couple of significant turns, including going from informatics into sort of the imaging world. And even as you said before that in your college career. But one of the things that we were going to talk about is go-to-market strategies. And I think it's very interesting that you've had so much perspective on the different aspects of the healthcare system based on where you've worked. If you think about what's involved in not just technology innovation, but bringing those to market, and then how you actually conduct business with the various ecosystem constituents, having that perspective has probably given you quite a bit of insight into how customers make decisions, no matter who your customer is. And that probably is not something that's as common as you might think in the healthcare industry, I would imagine.
I think having sat on the customer side to begin with is a huge advantage because you realize what it's like for a day in the life. They are busy, they have a lot of priorities. And at the end of the day, sitting and talking with someone from industry isn't necessarily going to be their priority. So you really have to understand the what's in it for them. And you have to learn how to build that relationship and make sure that you are that person that when you knock on their door, they say, come on in, I got 15 minutes for you. It's something that I think as I've worked through the different roles, it's no different than when you're in a new role and you're interacting with your own new leaders or when you're interacting with your team. It's about building that relationship. It's understanding what's important to them, what motivates them, and then how can you bring that to them? Especially in the last few years, I really lean towards the concept of servant leadership. Sales is no different. If you're going out to a customer and you're saying to them, hey, let me help you be better at this, and here's how I can do that, that's servant leadership in a sales capacity.
A lot of people perceive sales to be a role where there's almost an adversarial set of partnerships there, right? And I think that in many ways, from the outside, the corporate world sometimes looks that way too, from the perspective of management and then the teams that report to those managers. And what you're talking about is really breaking down those misperceptions by understanding who you're working with and making sure that you're the one adding value to them. And so that reciprocity is really important, no matter if you're dealing with client relationships or with the teams that report to you. And I think that's a very interesting insight that will probably help teams who are involved in sales, but also folks who are interested in moving into management roles as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. My last couple of teams, we've done personality assessments. You might do a disc or something like that, and you get to know what drives that person. Are they process oriented? Are they people oriented? And I just recently saw a LinkedIn learning. It was essentially saying you should do the same assessment of your customers, because if you have somebody and you're calling on a customer that is very process driven and you show up and you're very ad hoc, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, you're making me crazy. Get out of my office. On the flip side, if you get somebody who's super relational and you show up and you've got a very structured process and you're trying to be in and out, they're going to be like, this person doesn't care about me. Why would I want to work with them? I had a customer, we had really struggled to connect. And I'm like, you know what? Let me spend some time. And so I went out, and the first probably 2 to 3 meetings were scheduled for 30 minutes. I ended up spending almost an hour. And for about 45 of that, we talked about race cars because that's what was interesting to him. And you find that connection. And it was like, okay, my son loves cars. After about the third meeting, it was like, okay, let's talk business. But for him, that's what mattered. It mattered that I cared about him beyond just, can I get this PO today? And so I think it is understanding, whether it's your team, whether it's the leaders that you're working for, what's important to them and how do you deliver on that?
I think that's critically important, particularly in today's world where there are now buying ecosystems that are larger and more complex than there used to be. So it's no longer just showing up with a value proposition and saying, well, here's the logical reason why you should buy, but having the empathy and the understanding of who they are is important to be able to get not only their trust, but their willingness to work with you so that they will give you the opportunity to present those value propositions, right?
Absolutely. When I think about some of the biggest sales that I've had over the years or that my teams have had over the years, I would say the majority of the time is actually spent building the relationship. And then the small fraction at the end of the deal is spent crafting the deal. And that can mean a lot of different things. Getting to know them on a personal level. It can mean getting to know their organization and understanding, hey, what are the KPIs that you're measured on? And how do I help you achieve those? And again, it's no different whether it's a customer or it's your own leader or it's your own team. We're all driving towards the same thing. It's just a different socket of the industry.
Yeah. You've been with Accuray now for less than a year. And this is a different side of the business, that it's not the diagnostic side, it's the therapeutic side. And this has also, I think, probably opened your mind to a different kind of relationship building and a different kind of empathy. And I would wonder if you might talk a little bit about how, as a leader, you look at this role that you're playing now in this ecosystem and how that's changed the way that you've brought yourself to leading these teams and understanding the value that you provide and the critical nature of the products and services that you're delivering to patients.
It's amazing how different an industry can be. It's still healthcare, obviously, but when you're dealing with patients who have cancer and wake up every morning fighting for their life, it is just a different level of intensity and also just compassion required when you're working with your customers. So when you think about building relationships with a group of radiologists and x-ray techs is very different than building relationships with folks that are treating cancer patients every day. And I think it takes a little bit of just self-awareness to recognize you certainly are not the biggest thing that they're dealing with today. So when you walk into their office, it's being incredibly appreciative of the time that they took away from a patient to spend with you. Because if that patient is my parent or my daughter, I'm making sure that I'm optimizing their time, right? So for me, especially in this first 6 months, it comes back to the same basics. You got to build trust. You've got to acknowledge that you are somebody that's calling on them, and they have the choice not to give you their time. And that's part of what helps build that relationship, I think. And that does take time. And I think this industry, probably more than others, because it is very small and because of the intensity, it takes even longer. And I think once you get through and you show respect for what you deal with on a daily basis, now let me help you with how I think we can even do this better. It goes a long way, but it definitely takes time.
I'm just reflecting on what you just said because there's so much power in that lesson, and it relates obviously to when you're dealing with patients and the criticality of the healthcare solutions that you're providing. But I think it also relates to almost every other customer relationship. When you think about what you just said, it's not quite as acute if your customers are dealing with oncology patients and the criticality of the decisions they're making. But across the healthcare sphere, and in fact, in many industries, in all B2B industries, it is axiomatic that unless there's something really terribly going wrong with their plant or their hospital or something, you're not the most important thing they have to do right at that moment or in that day. Right? And so I would imagine for you, what that has done is, and I would think about this for all, whether it's salespeople or service people or marketers, it really hones your ability to craft and understand the value that you're providing because you have to earn that time that you're spending with those people and they're spending with you. And in order to earn that time, I think you have to be really confident about the value that you and your solution are going to be able to deliver. And you, as a communications specialist early in your career, of course, all the way through, then you have to craft that value story in such a manner that it's crisp and it's articulate and they understand it in their terms rather than in your terms. But I'm really struck by how important it is to understand that it's maybe the most important thing you're going to do that day, but it's not the most important thing they're going to do that day. And I wonder how you use that lesson in your leadership, in your team, to really help everybody understand the importance of customer empathy, but also really understanding our value proposition too.
Absolutely. And I think when you're first training salespeople, it comes down to pre-call planning, right? It's the simple basics of if you got 30 minutes with a customer, you'd better have a plan for what you're going in there with. And it should include something that means, hey, I can bring this value to you, and this is why I'm here today. If you go in and it's just, hey, I'm Joe and just wanted to meet you, they're going to look at you like,
Right.
clock's ticking, buddy. Get out of my office, right? I had a meeting with a customer recently. Sometimes there are those customers where you really just have to make sure they understand their value to you as well. Sometimes it's that, hey, I am here today simply to explain to you, you matter to us as a customer. And the most important thing is making sure that we're delivering for you so you can deliver for your patients. And that's really the only reason I'm here. And if that takes 5 minutes or 10 minutes and that's all you accomplished, and you walk out the door and you leave them 20 minutes left in their 30-minute spot, some people would argue, oh my gosh, you wasted 20 minutes. I would argue you respected their time, you delivered your message, and you bought yourself an opportunity to go back.
Yeah.
So with my team, I always try and remind them, have the intent, be respectful of the time, understand who you're calling on and why it's sales basic blocking and tackling. But I think it also comes down to any relationship. There's got to be a win-win. If everything is always a one-way street, it doesn't work, right? Whether it's friendships or, coworkers or your direct employees or customers. If I'm always going and asking you for something and you don't ever get to turn around and ask me, that's not going to last very long. So I think it's also that once you build that relationship and you show I'm here for you and I'm here to deliver for you, it then buys you that right to go back and say, okay, now here's what we need from you. Let's look at how we can make this a partnership. But that takes time.
No question. I wonder, in your experience over your years at GE Healthcare and now Accuray, and perhaps even in the earlier stages of a career, if you've noticed a shift in the way that buyers and sales teams interact, particularly with respect to the most recent changes in the internet and B2C behavior bleeding into B2B, and if that's something that you're cognizant of and that you're leading your teams to be aware of, and how you're addressing those changes in the market that you serve.
Yes. Oh my gosh. We've talked about this so much, both in my role at GE and now at Accuray. We have very educated patients these days. If you look 10 years ago versus now, you can go down a rabbit hole on the internet and learn more about what your potential problem is or treatment is. Patients are educated, sometimes for the worst, right? I'm sure doctors are like, oh my gosh, stop Googling things. We don't want to hear it. But for better or worse, they know. And I think depending on the industry, you can definitely leverage that to help educate those patients. Or sometimes you also have to use that to help educate your customers on how they can reach your patients. For example, we see at Accuray, we have a product where it truly is a differentiator in terms of patient care. The problem is you can go direct to customer with that, but until they're at the point where they have that specific cancer and they need a treatment, they aren't necessarily looking for that, right? So how do you make that messaging stick? And if you're going B2C, you got to market a lot to make sure that hits at the right time. But When you look at the internet, there's also that once that message is out there, it stays out there. So, I saw a statistic and it was showing actually, it's actually Jody George, who was already on your podcast previously, but we were talking about the different media forms that people use based on their age group and where they get their news. And we were laughing because my kids' generation, they don't ever listen to the news, right? They're on YouTube and they get podcasts, and that's where they're getting all their information. So, if as a marketing organization, our target audience is 40 and under, and we're using radio or news radio, TV, they're not going to get that message. So it really is, I think, a shift in making sure that you're aligning to each of those different demographic markets to make sure the span from 80 to 30 and where they're getting their news is so different that you've really got to be specific in who you're trying to hit and why, or you could just waste your time.
I think that's incredibly true across different industries, but in particular, as you've got a customer and then they've got a communications challenge as well to their patients, it's compounded for sure. I wonder if in your relationships with your customers directly, you're seeing some of those trends as well, where some of the customers, the caregivers, the providers are very well educated. It's no longer a feature function discussion with their sales team. And if that relationship is also shifting to something different from what it used to be, at least from an industry point of view. You
Oh, 100%. I would say, well, in my time in terms of selling capital equipment, the buyers are incredibly educated on the features and functionality. I think the job of the vendor or the sales rep at that point is to clarify with them, do you truly understand what this does and the value of it? But even more than that, it's to help them improve the outcome. And that's really where, in my previous role and in this current role, it's working with customers to say, great, you're interested in this product. Features are going to change, features will evolve. At the end of the day, it's going to do what you need it to do, but let's talk about how it's going to drive referrals, how it's going to be reimbursable. Is it going to improve your revenue? What are your throughputs? It's a much bigger story, which actually requires a much more sophisticated sales rep as well. It's solutions based, outcome selling, whatever you want to call it. But it is so much less about the feature and functionality than it ever used to be.
And I think that you touched on something else that's pretty important here is that as the decisions process change, we may need a different kind of sales team and a sales team member, somebody who's more consultative, who is more of an industry expert than they used to be rather than a product expert. And I think so for us, as we think about the changes you've talked about in your buyer community, it sometimes requires not only that our go-to-market focus on a sort of different set of business strategies, but also that our teams have to be well prepared to be a resource to the customer. So I wonder if, as you're leading your teams now and as you've done in the past, you're looking at the teams and evaluating them through a different lens in terms of how ready they are for this new way of working with customers.
Absolutely. So, it's funny. I'll share a story. When I was in the digital space and sales, I had an account I was working with. They were an existing customer of ours. They were evaluating either upgrading our system or replacing with something else. And after a very long sales process, again, it's about relationship, right? And I got to be very close with the team. And my goal for them was no matter what you choose, I want you to know what you'd get from us, both from a product perspective and from a support and a relationship perspective. If at the end of the day you decide we're not what's right for you, that's your choice. But I want to make sure we're really clear on what you have. And at the end of the day, they decided, you know what, we're going to go a different direction. And I had built a relationship at that point where I was able to say, I understand why you're choosing that. I firmly believe it's the wrong choice for you. And here's why. Please think on that. Get back to me. I would be happy to talk with you more. But we'd gotten to a point where I could have that trusting conversation and push back a little bit. About a month later, I got a call and it was like, thought about this more. And I still want to replace the solution that we have, but we'd like to go with your more robust, completely different solution. And it ended up being one of the largest deals I had booked in that role. They are still using it successfully today, many years later. But it was truly just that, again, they felt comfortable to call me and ask me a question because of all of the time and transparency that we provided along the way. So with my teams, I'm okay going to a customer and being transparent about, hey, we're not going to be perfect. No vendor is perfect. You're going to have your ups and your downs. You're going to have hey, we did this really great development, and then you wait a few years. And so you've got this like downtime and then you develop again. There's ebbs and flows, but as long as you're transparent and they know your goal is truly to be a partner to them, at some point they'll feel confident that they can pick up the phone and call you. But I think you're right. It is a very different skill set than just let me go in and tell you all the features about my product.
Yeah, and something that we're finding today is that mindset is also being affected by the digital nature of the way that customers are learning. The sales teams used to show up, and that's where the customer got their product information from, and there was a sort of required relationship to know that. But today, as you pointed out, the customers and the patients are using the internet a lot, and they're getting a lot of information online. The sales teams also have to learn how to use that and not push back on that and not reject that as an affront to their professional sensibilities. You need a relationship with marketing that's strong enough to be able to say, whatever touch point the customer has with our company, they're going to get the right value proposition. We need to trust that. We need to make sure it's consistent. And then when we do show up, we're adding value to that particular conversation. Maybe they get some of their information online doing their own research. Maybe there's a calculator somewhere that they're using to figure out throughput instead of asking us what's the throughput, right? And then when we are there, we're balancing that out, but we're also being consistent with those value stories, right?
Absolutely. It's the shift from you can make me a data sheet, but what I really want is the what's in it for them. At the end of the day, great, it's got this tech and this spec and this software and this service contract, but what does that mean for their bottom line? What does that mean for their patient care and their patient outcomes? And that's so funny because so we sold a product in X-ray that was first of its kind AI on device. It was really tough for customers to get their head around, okay, X-ray is a bit of a commodity space. You don't make great reimbursement. Why would I invest more on this AI tool that I'm not going to get paid extra for? So if you go in and just talk about the feature, they're not going to buy it, right? So we ended up, it was like the first time we said, let's put together the data to show what the risk is if it was a pneumothorax detection. What's the risk to your hospital if you miss that pneumothorax? What is the cost to that patient, the cost to your facility, the days in an ICU, et cetera? And once you look at it from that perspective, again, it shifts it from I'm spending $25,000 extra to I'm avoiding $150,000 a year of potential risk. And I think that, especially when you look at how thin the bottom line of most healthcare systems is, it's one of those things where you've really got to show them how to really dial in every penny.
They're different dimensions of value. Value is not always about the lowest price. It's not always about the highest throughput. There are multiple dimensions of value. And as a leader, you clearly understand that. And then you are imparting that to your team and their ability to articulate that. And so I think that must be a lesson that you've learned with respect to being a general manager of an organization where you have marketing reporting to you, you have sales reporting to you, you have service reporting to you. Everybody really has to understand where we add value and where we should be focused. And that probably is a challenge with all of those different teams, I would imagine, to corral everybody into that same laser focus. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I will say it probably is one of the biggest challenges, right? Because when you look at no matter the organization or the size of the organization, from the top down, you've got global teams, you've got regional teams, you've got marketing, you've got sales, you've got product, and everybody has their objectives for the year of what they're working on. And they don't always initially align to the customer sale, right? So it's starting at the customer and working that backwards through each role in the organization to say, are we all aligned? And I think that's something that honestly in every organization I've worked for has been a struggle because it's inevitable. You're going to be in a role, you get a new role. Let's say I'm in marketing and I've got this great idea and I'm not go hard after this great idea. And then it evolves in a direction that is different from where we really need to play in the market. So you've still got this great idea and you want to see it to fruition. But at the end of the day, does it deliver on the right spot for our customer? And I see that a lot. And it's something that is, again, I really think you have to come back to. We just had this conversation with my team last week of when you're setting goals and objectives for the year, how many goals and objectives are appropriate, right? At the corporate level, we have so many goals and objectives because those align to hundreds of resources throughout the organization. So that makes sense. But when I get down to my sales team, honestly, if they have more than 2 to 3 goals for the year, they're never going to execute on those. But if you only have 2 to 3 and it's that same repeated message that they wake up to every single day that says, "This is the most important thing to my customer, so it's the most important thing to me," that helps drive the right change.
I think that's a really important lesson. And I think it's also important that the marketing team has the same essential goals as the sales team, because otherwise you end up with divergent activities and then everybody wonders why we're not playing well together. So I think that, aligning those is critical. You're obviously very effective at a lot of different aspects of this role. And I wonder, as we get close to the end of our session here, if you might think a little bit about what you do that inspires confidence on the part of those that have brought you into the organizations and your teams. What is it about your leadership style, your approach, how you show up that has given people the confidence to entrust you with these roles and to entrust their confidence in you as their manager, as their leader? Any lessons that you might be able to impart?
I would say if there's any one word that would sum it up, it's authenticity. As you've probably gathered just from talking with me, I'm not the most polished person. And I think sometimes in a corporate role, people expect a certain posture. And what I find is that once people get used to that, they realize it is authentic. It is who I am. When I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. If I say I don't like something, I don't like it. Right. So for my team, I find it's a lot easier to build trust more quickly. I also feel they're more willing to come to me because I'm pretty casual, and it's an advantage for them because I'm accessible, but it's an advantage for me because I then know what's going on in the organization and I hear it from a lot of different perspectives, and that helps me shape my strategy for how I lead. My last team, I'm still getting to know this team, so I will say I'm gonna spare them the hot seat. But my last team, I had such a wide range of personalities, but we knew who was really good at different things and we knew when to pull them in. And I think it's also calling that out among the team, right? Nobody feels better than when leadership acknowledges, "Hey, you're really good at this. Hey, guys, everybody on the team, this person is really good at that. If you need help here, pull them in." It's building that confidence in people to know I don't have to look just like Joe or Amy or whoever. I can look like my own individual in this role because I'm really good at this. Now, if I need somebody who's good at that, I'm going to pull somebody else in to help me. But let me go drive what I'm really good at.
I think a lot of people wish they had that level of confidence to show up the way you have. I wonder if this has evolved, if you've learned this over time, or you learned from mentors or from doing things another way and realized that wasn't you and you had to change it, where you are both effective and confident in being who you are, and that other people clearly recognize that this is the right approach and that they can benefit from being around you. Yeah.
It's a combination, probably. So I grew up in Montana. I grew up really not thinking about my career or where it was going to take me, but I was never one to hesitate from an opportunity. To me, each next step was just an adventure. And so I think that served me well. That was maybe innate and served me well. My first role with GE, I covered the Northeast. So the Montana girl headed to New York and Manhattan. And it was this culture clash of, oh my gosh, these people are drivers.
Mm.
But what it taught me right away is, again, you've got to be respectful of their time, be direct, and build trust. It's those three things. I think I had to kind of test, what is my style? Do I try and come with a more hard-nosed driver type mentality? And I realized it didn't work for me because when it's not authentic, you're not going to be good at it, right? If it's not authentic, you can learn some skills, but you're never going to be amazing at the things that aren't authentic to who you are.
There's been so many lessons that you've been so generous to share with our audience, from being able to assess the business that you're in and designing a go-to-market strategy that fits that business, and then to design your interactions with them about how you can add value. That's a leadership style that I think a lot of people would love to emulate and can learn from. And I think clearly your authenticity allows you to be confident in your own style and your decisions and the relationships that you build. And I think that confidence is also inspiring to the people that you work with as well. So it's been such a pleasure to talk with you, Nancy. I really appreciate it. I'm sure that our audience will as well. And I want to thank you so much for your time and your insights and your generosity.
Thank you. I appreciate the time. It's been great. And I just really enjoyed the discussion.